So hey, compositing is the kind of magic that turns this into this. But to do good compositing, you need to understand how to use it, and you need to know how to prepare for it in the 3D phase. In the first part of this mini course, I would like to show you how I did the compositing for my artwork Courage. I'll go over how to prepare a scene for compositing in Blender from scratch. So when you're done with this course, you would know my entire workflow for doing compositing inside Blender and be able to apply this to your own animations and artworks. But hey, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I will go over in this guide is how I would set up the render process for this car. If you're not aware what render processes are, it's a lot of images that you can mix together in compositing to create a nice image. Here you can see the process that I used for this layer in my final comp. In this video I'll probably throw around words like comp, post, and color grading. Just have to know that comp means compositing, and it's like the collection of nodes or the setup that mixes all these processes together. When I'm talking about post, I mean the post effect. So that can include vignettes, sharpening, glares, lens flares, and all that kind of stuff. And color grading is where we balance the colors and make them pop a bit more. So if we go into Blender, we can actually preview these passes in the viewport. You just click this drop-down menu, and then you can pick, for instance, ambient occlusion. This pass can help you make some fake lighting, because ambient occlusion is just calculating where surfaces are very close to each other. Because in real life, when surfaces are very close to each other, you will get a dark area. So let's check out another pass which is very useful, and this is the mist pass. I use this for almost all my renders. So right here it doesn't make so much sense because mist is calculating the distance an object is away from the camera, and you can see it here. If you look at the background, then you can really see this haze or mist effect. Even though it looks way over the top here, in a final render this is a very important effect to have. And because we're gonna comp this together, we can adjust how intense it is. We just need to make sure that we have everything inside the view. So if everything is black, then you won't have any data to work with, and if everything is white, then we don't have any data either. So a way to check if everything is set up correctly is to enable mist in viewport display on your camera. And then you can go into the world setting where you actually change the mist. And you can see how this is pushing this line in front of the camera. The line is indicating where the mist will start and where it will be at 100%, so where it will kind of end. So for this scene I set it to 222. Especially if you have animation, it's good to just make sure that it's long enough. Because if anything goes beyond this point, if this fence, for instance, was out here, then you would lose the detail and you wouldn't be able to get the gradient on the fence that you would need to. So if you take a look at the final image, you can see how this mist pass was used to separate all the trees in the background and add a lot of depth to the scene. It's a really powerful pass, and don't forget to use it if you're doing any kind of environments. With that set up, let's head back to the main car and take a look at some of the other passes. So another pass that is usually very useful is the denoising data. This one is used for the install denoise node. You can see when you enable it, you have these denoising normal, denoising albedo, and noisy image. And you just plug these into the denoise node. And then you will have your denoise result here. I recommend always just enabling this one, and then you can see if you will use it or just ignore it in the end. So one last thing that I usually add is always the Cryptomattes. The Cryptomattes are really cool. What they do is they allow you to mask out different objects or materials in the scene just by clicking on them in the compositor. So let's turn on object and material. This way we will be able to pick objects and materials separately. So I usually use the Cryptomattes if there are some mistakes I need to fix or something similar like that. There are a lot of tutorials online about how to use them, but I'll just show it very quickly here and show you why they are so powerful. So let's use this render that I already saved and plug the object 123 into the Crypto021. And let's just preview the image. So what you need to go is to go down to the pick option, and then you can see your image and you have the different masks here. If we were to use the materials instead, you would be able to see the materials instead of the objects. So here, let's go ahead and pick the helmet. Now we have this matte, and it's a perfect matte of just the helmet. We can always go back and pick like multiple things. And this way it's very easy to mask, to make a mask for yourself to use for compositing later. I use this all the time if I need to do quick fixes, or if you just want to call this something, but not the other objects in the scene. So for some other passes that I use from time to time, it includes the emission. And for this project, I actually use the emission. The reason is that if you go to the rear of the car and we then go to the render pass emission, then you can see we have these small orange dots, and those are actually just some basic planes with an emission shade applied to them. I use these to make some glare effect, and it's just very easy to make this glow if you have the emission turned on, because then you will have a pass with just the emission that you can blur. Another thing I like to add is the environment, because in case I would like to just use the environment image and then put it behind everything, I can easily do that if I have the pass. Some other passes I sometimes like to use or like to add is the glossy direct and the glossy indirect. if you start to use those, you have to know that they're kind of fake, because the ray tracing out of the box in cycles is actually physically correct. And if you start to add this on top, you'll get more reflection that you would have in real life. So just be careful when you're using them and don't overdo it. But it can be very good. For instance, I used this indirect glossy pass for the visor of the helmet because I felt like the combined pass didn't have so much of a reflection. And I just wanted to boost that a little bit. You can also see it here, that it has this very reflexive surface. And technically, I think the black one would be more accurate, but I just like this result more. If you want to fake everything and go crazy with it, you can also use the normal pass. I did use this a little bit for this render, but it's also a thing you have to be careful with because it's completely fake and you're basically destroying the realism of the image. So let's take a look at this normal node here. So the way that this little ball works is that you take the normal pass, which looks like this, which is basically the information of which way the normals of all these surfaces are facing. Then you can kind of add fake light on top by using this normal node and then using the dot product. So the way this works is that you can just start to spin this ball around and you'll get some different results. This can be very useful if you want to fake some lighting. So what I used here is this setup right here. And because of the fact that the sun in the scene is placed up here, and it's like shining light down this way, I try to get the same effect with this normal node. Usually it's a bad idea to kind of go against the lighting in your scene, but think about like what it does in the scene and try to do the same with the dot product. I plugged this into a color ramp and then I just raised the blacks and made them this kind of like teal blue color. And I soft lit it on top of the original image. You can see the effect here. It basically just adds a little more definition to the background because I felt like the background was a bit flat. It would probably be better to go in and change the environment lighting so it would have this blue tint in it instead of just faking it. But sometimes it's just easier and quicker to do this in comp because you have very quick control on it. You can just very easily bump this up if you want more or turn it down if you want less. So one other thing I would like to discuss with you is the render layers. For this project, I have a lot of different render layers, and there can be multiple reasons to do this. For instance, for this scene, I used specific lighting that I called fake lights that I used only on this car here. All the other objects didn't have these lights. I did that so I could better highlight the shape of the car. For instance, this rim here would be very difficult to get without overblowing the rest of the scene or without making weird lighting on the rest of the scene. So you can do this to get a creative effect that you're looking for, especially when you're doing rim lights. You can also split it up due to performance. Sometimes it's less heavier on your graphics card if you only want to render a few objects on each render layer. I also tend to always separate the main object from the background because in compositing it's much easier to make some adjustments to the background and then other adjustments to the main object if you have them split into two different render layers. So I'll just quickly go ahead and guide you through the setup in 3D of a new scene with only this car and then the white background. But first, let's take a little break because I'm getting so tired of listening to my voice in this edit all the time. So I was thinking, there's nothing better than a meme to pump up the mood. And what do you love more than a weird noise from your GPU or CPU Vera uses that starts making this weird noise when the render is almost done? We've all been there and it's a pain every time. But hey, let's get back into it. And I will show you how to set up the render layers like I would do it. So right now we already have a collection called Hero Car, and let's just drop this outside and then call this other collection for BG, for background. We also have some other stuff in here. We can drag it out in the scene collection, doesn't matter. So what we need to do to be able to split this into different render layers is to go into the filter options and then check holdout and the indirect only. Now let's call our first render layer for car. Make a duplicate of it or make a new. And call this one for BG. So for the background, we would like to only render the background without the car. And now let's just check the indirect only button. And now we can see we have the nice contact shadow and we don't have the car. So now we actually already set up our BG layer. Let's go to the car and then do the opposite. Just go to the background and click indirect only. Now we have this thing here, and that's a problem because now we will see the background. So what we need to do is just go into the render tab, down to film, and then just check transparent. This way we'll have a transparent background. Another thing we need to remember is to, on the car render layer, enable the holdout option for the background. If you look closely here, you can see how the bar, which is sticking through the ground, is cut off when we enable this setting. The reason why that is important is because we don't want to render the bar under the floor, because we're going to put this render layer here on top of the floor afterwards. If the bar would be there, then the bar would be sticking through the floor but still be visible, which will create a very weird result. So now we can check all the passes that we want to have for the final render. We don't need environment because we're not using environment in this one. So now we've split it up into 2 different render layers and we are ready to export the images. But we cannot hit F12 quite yet. We have to check the output properties first. When you want to do compositing, it's very good to use EXR files to save your picture in. The reason for that is that if you're using a PNG image, you don't include all the different layers. PNG just doesn't support that. However, if you use OpenEXR multilayer, you actually get a file with all the layers intact inside of it. However, if you use the output properties here, you can only pick one image. That will mean that it will combine everything you do in compositing, then put it into one image, and that's not really what we want. Instead, we will head into the compositor, because there's another way to export images with Blender. So here you can see that our first render layer car has all these different passes, and that's perfect, that's what we want. So let's put these on top of each other. And we could go ahead and render and then use these nodes to composite on top of. And even though that's quick and easy, it's not the best approach. Because if you want to do different versions, or if you end up closing Blender, the renders will be lost, they will be gone. So instead, let's add a file output node and save out our renders. So this node does the exact same thing as this output here. This just allows you to change a lot of things. So let's head to item and properties and set our path. Okay, great. Now let's pick the file format. Let's go with OpenEXR multilayer and go down and check the inputs. But let's add a few more layers to it. So the first layer, let's call this one beauty. Second one, let's call this mist. And that's it. Okay, finally. So an important note is that when you're using the Cryptomattes, sometimes I have experienced that I have problems if I'm using the half float instead of the full float. So if you're having any problems with the Cryptomattes, just try switching this to full float to make sure that DXR has as much data as possible inside the file. If you're not using Cryptomattes, then just leave this at half float, because then the files will be much smaller. If you want to avoid having to set up all this every single time, you can group this one, and then just call this group something like default outputs, and save this file. So whenever you go into a new Blender file and you want to use the same kind of outputs, just go to the compositor and go to append, find your file, go to node tree and pick the one called default outputs. This way you can just reuse it without having to make all these passes every single time. Okay, so let's connect all this stuff up and make a separate one for the background. Let's call this one for F1 BG and call this top one for F1 car. Now we're ready to render it, and we'll be saving out 2 files with a lot of passes inside of them. So now we have a nicely set up 3D scene, which is ready for compositing. But I also hope you have a good understanding of the theory and feel ready to go into battle with your nodes and passes. That aside, in the next part we'll put all these passes into a compositing file and start extracting a really nice image out of all of them. By the way, if you haven't already, go check out my Instagram profile where I sometimes tease a bit of my upcoming projects. If you'd like to check out the scene file that I'm setting up for this course, you can go to my Gumroad where you can grab a copy of it and support me by doing so. You get the model of the F1 car I used in this project along with the materials that you can check out for yourself. You're of course free to use the model and the materials for your own personal projects. And if you render something cool with the car, please drop me a link and I'll be sure to check it out. But hey, enough said. Stay happy out there guys and see you in the next one.